Good morning, boys and girls. It's wonderful to be with you once again, even if it is just on a screen. I want to tell you a story today about a man called Peter. He was one of Jesus' disciples. He had a brother called Andrew, and before he decided to follow Jesus, he and his brother were fishermen. Peter was a rough and tough man. You didn't mess with him, because he had a reputation for sorting things out with his fists. But during his time with Jesus, his rough edges had been worn down, and his compassion came to the fore. Peter had always claimed to be Jesus' most loyal and devoted follower, and Jesus did rely on him, and he called him his rock, because Peter was so dependable. So you can imagine Peter's surprise when one day Jesus told Peter that he was going to betray him, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and that when he had done so, a cock would crow. Peter was horrified and claimed that it would never happen, that he would die before denying Jesus, and he meant it. Then the fateful day came. The disciples had met in the upper room, Jesus had washed their feet and then shared the Passover meal with them. Judas had left to do his worst, and Jesus and the disciples had gone to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. Suddenly, the authorities had arrived and arrested Jesus. They took him to Caiaphas' house to be tried. The other disciples had run away terrified that they too would be arrested, but not Peter. At a safe distance, he followed the soldiers and sat in the high priest's courtyard, near a fire, and waited to see what would happen. And then it did happen. A stranger recognised him as one of Jesus' followers. Peter was terrified. He didn't know what to do or say, so he denied it. He claimed it wasn't true, it was a lie. It must be someone else they were talking about. At that moment, a cock crowed and Peter felt ashamed, and he hated himself. The next day, Jesus was crucified and Peter was too ashamed to watch. He hid away in a locked room with some of the other disciples. Then on Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene burst into the room and told them that the stone that sealed the tomb had been rolled away. Peter couldn't believe it. He started to run to the tomb where Jesus had been buried, but John was faster and got there first. Peter and John found the clothes Jesus had been wearing, but no body. They returned home to tell the others. After they left, Mary stood outside, crying. A man asked her why she was weeping. "Because they've stolen Jesus' body," she replied. The man said, "Mary." And she looked up at him and immediately recognised Jesus. Jesus then told her to go and tell the disciples what she had seen. A few days later, Jesus appeared to all the disciples, apart from Thomas. But no mention is made of Peter. He was still too embarrassed to talk to Jesus, and maybe he thought that Jesus was angry with him because he had betrayed him. It wasn't until another few days had passed, and Peter and Andrew had decided that they would take their boat out and do some fishing. Suddenly, Peter caught sight of a figure on the shore, and immediately recognised Jesus. He didn't wait for the boat to get back to land. He dived overboard and swam back to land. So desperate was he to speak to Jesus. After breakfast on the beach, Jesus asked Peter to walk with him. I wonder how Peter felt. Happy? Worried? Excited? Afraid? A little bit of everything, I suspect. Then Jesus asked Peter a strange question. "Peter, do you love me?" Peter replied, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." For a second time, Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter replied, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." When Jesus asked him a third time, Peter was getting a little annoyed and said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." As soon as he said it for the third time, the penny dropped, and Peter understood that Jesus had forgiven him for that night in the courtyard when Peter had denied him. His mistake was forgiven and would never be mentioned again. At that moment, a huge weight was lifted from Peter's shoulders, And he went on to tell thousands of people about Jesus and how much he loved them. Boys and girls, Peter's story is one that teaches us that no matter what we do, no matter how bad a mistake we make, no matter how often we keep getting things wrong in life, all we have to do is ask Jesus for forgiveness, and he will wipe the slate clean, never to bring the matter up again. That is what makes Easter such a special time of year. It is when we remember how much God loves the world. So don't let your mistakes hold you back. Just take them to the cross and leave them behind, and then go and make God happy by living your life to the full. Happy Easter.